Robert Sterling checked his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in a minute. Treating his father's memorial visit like a rescheduled board meeting, he was desperate to leave. The heated leather seat of the Cadillac Escalade offered a comfortable barrier against the grim Chicago afternoon, but Robert could already feel the phantom chill of the cemetery seeping through the tinted glass. "We are here, sir," James said from the front seat. His voice was low, respectful, but his eyes in the rearview mirror held a lingering sadness that Robert chose to ignore. James had driven for the Sterling family for 30 years. He knew the dates of anniversaries better than Robert did. "Keep the engine running, James." 5 minutes. Robert clipped, tapping his smartphone screen to end a call with his partners in Tokyo. "I cannot be late for the foundation gala. The donors expect me at 6 sharp. Of course, Mr. Sterling. The wind is biting today. Lake Michigan doesn't forgive this time of year," James murmured as he stepped out to open the rear door. Robert adjusted his cashmere scarf, bracing himself. He grabbed the bouquet of white lilies lying on the seat next to him. They were expensive, pristine, and completely wrapped in plastic ordered by his assistant 3 months in advance. He didn't even know if his father liked lilies. It was simply the correct thing to buy. He stepped out, and the wind immediately assaulted him, cutting through the layers of his Italian wool coat. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt path with a sound like dry bones rattling. Oakwood Hills was silent, save for the distant hum of the highway and the wind howling through the naked branches of the ancient oaks. It was a place for the dead, and Robert felt an instinctive urge to return to the living, breathing world of commerce and noise. He walked briskly toward the Sterling family plot, his polished shoes crunching loudly on the gravel. He rehearsed the schedule in his head: 2 minutes of silence, place the flowers, perhaps a quick photo for the family archivist, and then back to the car. Grief, for Robert, was a transaction that had been settled years ago when the funeral bills were paid. As he rounded the hedge that separated the VIP plots from the main path, he prepared his face a solemn, dignified mask suitable for a billionaire paying respects to a titan of industry. He looked toward the large marble angel that marked Arthur Sterling's final resting place, expecting only cold stone and solitude. But Robert stops abruptly. He sees a figure silhouetted against the gray sky, sitting directly on the marble ledge of his father's grave. Indignation flared in his chest instantly. This was a private sector. The security fees alone cost more than most people's annual rent. Who would dare trespass on the Sterling plot? A groundskeeper taking a break? A vandal? Robert tightened his grip on the plastic-wrapped lilies, his pace quickening from a walk to a march. He was ready to shout, ready to wield his authority like a weapon. He got closer, and the image resolved itself. It wasn't a groundskeeper. It was a young black boy in a ragged hoodie, looking completely at home in a place where he clearly didn't belong. The sight of the boy, scruffy, poor, and unbothered, triggered a flare of indignation in Robert that had less to do with safety and everything to do with ownership. It was an instinctive recoil, the way a homeowner might react to finding a muddy footprint on a white carpet. This plot belonged to the Sterlings. It was paid for, maintained, and exclusively theirs. The presence of this stranger felt like a violation of the only order Robert still respected, the power of property. He marched across the grass, disregarding the damp earth that was surely ruining the soles of his Italian leather shoes. The wind picked up, whipping his coattails around his legs and stinging his exposed face, but the heat of his anger kept him warm. As he drew closer, the details of the intruder became sharper, feeding his prejudice. The boy was small, perhaps 11 or 12, drowning in a gray hoodie that was several sizes too big and pilling with age. Around his neck was a hand-knit red scarf, fraying at the edges, a splash of vibrant, defiant color against the somber gray of the stone and sky. It looked cheap, homemade, and utterly out of place next to the polished granite angel that guarded Arthur Sterling's rest. "Hey, you!" Robert shouted, his voice cracking the solemn silence of the cemetery like a whip. "Get away from there!" The boy didn't scramble away in terror as Robert expected. Instead, he flinched slightly, his shoulders hunching up, but he didn't run. He looked up, startled, his eyes wide and dark. He slowly closed the book he had been holding open on his lap, carefully marking the page with a dry maple leaf before placing his hand protectively over the cover. Robert loomed over him, using his height and his expensive overcoat to cast a long, intimidating shadow over the child. "This is private property," Robert spat, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Can't you read the signs at the gate? Or did you just ignore them to come in here and make a mess?" He scanned the marble ledge, looking for scratches, graffiti, or stolen bronze fixtures. He saw nothing but the boy and his battered book, but that didn't quell his suspicion. In Robert's world, people like this boy didn't visit graves in VIP sections unless they wanted something money, metal to sell, or simply to deface what they couldn't have. "Where are your parents?" Robert demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low growl. "Did they send you here? Are they waiting by the fence for you to bring something back?" The boy shook his head, clutching the book tighter to his chest. His sneakers were worn down to the rubber, wet from the grass, and the sight of them disgusted Robert. They were a reminder of a poverty he had spent his entire life distancing himself from. "I'm talking to you." Robert stepped closer, encroaching on the boy's personal space, treating him no better than a stray dog that had wandered into a banquet hall. "You are trespassing on the Sterling family plot. I should call security and have you dragged out of here. Is that what you want?" The boy remained seated, shrinking into his oversized hoodie, but his gaze didn't waver. There was no guilt in his face, only a confusion that infuriated Robert further. Why wasn't he apologizing? Why wasn't he running? "Go on." Robert raised a gloved hand, making a shooing motion, his patience evaporating completely. "Get out. Before I call the police and have them explain the law to you." He reached out as if to grab the boy's shoulder to physically remove him, assuming the boy was defacing the stone or refusing to leave out of spite. The distance between the billionaire's hand and the boy's shoulder closed rapidly. Malik stands up, clutching the battered book to his chest, and looks Robert in the eye. "I'm not vandalizing, sir. I'm just reading to him." "Reading to him?" Robert scoffed, the excuse sounding absurd to his pragmatic ears. "He's dead. And I doubt he'd want to listen to whatever this is." Robert gestured dismissively at the object in the boy's hands. To him, the dead were gone. They were names on trust funds, portraits in boardrooms, and bodies under stone. They didn't need stories. They needed maintenance fees and occasional flowers. The idea that this child believed he was performing some kind of service was either a delusion or a very clever, rehearsed line designed to tug at the heartstrings of grieving relatives for a few dollars. Robert Sterling, however, did not have heartstrings that could be tugged so easily. "Pack up," Robert commanded, his patience wearing thin as the first few flakes of snow began to drift down from the leaden sky, sticking to the fine wool of his coat like white ash. "I don't know who put you up to this, maybe a parent. Maybe you thought you'd find an easy mark here, but it ends now. Take your book and go. This is a family plot, not a public library." The boy didn't move. He looked down at the book, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the cover with a reverence that annoyed Robert. It was a gesture of ownership, of intimacy. "It's not just a book," Malik said softly, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "Mr. Arthur gave me this. He said it was his favorite. He liked the part about the fence." With trembling hands, Malik lifted the book so Robert could see the cover. It was an ancient, hardcover edition, the spine cracked and taped over with yellowing Scotch tape, the corners battered from decades of use. The title was faded but unmistakable in gold lettering, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Robert froze, the breath trapped in his throat. Time seemed to warp. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in a freezing cemetery in November. He was 7 years old, sitting on the plush Persian rug in his father's study. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. His father, Arthur, was younger then, his voice booming and theatrical as he read the lines of Tom, tricking the other boys into whitewashing the fence. It was one of the few vivid memories Robert had of his father actually being present, before the business consumed everything, before boarding schools and shareholder meetings took over. That copy. Robert recognized the specific tear on the dust jacket. He hadn't seen that book in 40 years. He assumed it had been lost in one of the many moves, or packed away in a box of junk when they cleared out the estate. The shock quickly curdled into suspicion. How did this street kid get his hands on a Sterling family heirloom? "You stole it," Robert accused, his voice shaking not with cold, but with rage. The memory felt tainted now, touched by dirty hands. You must have snuck into the house when he was sick. Did you take it from his nightstand while the nurse wasn't looking? Or did you dig through the trash? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Malik. Give it back. That belongs to my father. It belongs to me. Malik pulled the book back against his chest, shaking his head. His eyes were filling with tears, not from fear, but from the sting of the accusation. No, sir. I didn't steal it. I would never steal from Mr. Arthur. Then stop lying, Robert shouted, the veneer of the polite businessman cracking completely. My father didn't know you. He spent his last years inside the estate, barely seeing anyone. He certainly didn't hang around with children from the neighborhood. He sat on the porch, Malik insisted, his voice gaining a desperate strength. Every Thursday at 4 p.m. I walked by after school. He waved at me first. He was lonely. Lonely. Robert laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He had a staff of 10 people. He had the best doctors money could buy. He wasn't lonely. He was, Malik said firmly. He waited for me. We sat on the porch swing. He couldn't read the small print anymore, so he asked me to read to him. That's why he gave me the book. He said I did the voices better than the nurses. Robert stared at the boy. The specific detail about the small print hit a nerve. Arthur's eyesight had failed in the last year, a detail Robert only knew from the monthly medical reports he skimmed, never from conversation. But he refused to accept it. He refused to believe that his father, the great Arthur Sterling, had found companionship with this stranger, while Robert was too busy closing deals in Tokyo and London. You're making this up, Robert whispered, trying to convince himself more than the boy. Why would he ask you? Malik looked Robert dead in the eye, his expression shifting from sadness to a piercing honesty that stripped Robert naked. He said he had to pay me in stories, because his son was too busy making millions to make time for a visit. The accusation hung in the cold air like steam, but instead of shrinking back, Malik reached into his book with the steady hands of someone who knew the truth. Robert felt a sudden, sharp ringing in his ears, drowning out the distant hum of the highway. The boy's words, his son was too busy making millions, had struck him with the force of a physical blow, penetrating the armor of his expensive suit and his even more expensive ego. For a moment, he wanted to lash out, to list his achievements, his philanthropy, the massive wings of hospitals named after the Sterling family. He wanted to scream that he worked this hard for the family, to uphold the legacy Arthur himself had built. But the words died in his throat because, deep down, in a place he rarely visited, he knew the boy wasn't lying. My father was confused near the end, Robert stammered, his voice losing its thunderous authority, replaced by a desperate need to rationalize. He looked around the empty cemetery as if seeking a witness to support him. The medication, it messed with his memory. He probably thought you were someone else. You took advantage of a lonely, senile old man. It was a cruel thing to say, and Robert knew at the moment it left his lips. He was projecting his own guilt onto a 12-year-old child, trying to make Malik the villain so he wouldn't have to be the negligent son. Malik didn't argue. He didn't scream back or try to defend his honor with words. He knew that adults like Robert didn't listen to words from kids like him. Instead, he simply opened the worn copy of Tom Sawyer. The spine cracked softly, a sound that seemed incredibly loud in the silence between them. Robert watched, mesmerized despite himself. He expected the boy to pull out money, or maybe a stolen trinket. From between the pages, marking the chapter where Tom and Huck witnessed the tragedy in the graveyard, Malik pulled out a photograph. It wasn't a digital printout or an image on a cracked smartphone screen. It was an old-fashioned Polaroid, the kind with the thick white border, slightly bent at the corner. Malik held it out. His hand was small, the skin ashen from the cold, but it was steady. He told me to keep this safe. He said you might not believe me. Robert stared at the offered rectangle of chemical paper. He didn't want to take it. Taking it meant acknowledging this reality. But curiosity, morbid and compelling, moved his hand. He stripped off his leather glove, needing to feel the texture of the proof, and took the photo between his thumb and forefinger. The image was slightly overexposed, bathed in the warm, golden light of a late summer afternoon. It showed the front porch of the Sterling estate, a place Robert hadn't sat on in 10 years. In the frame, sitting on the wicker swing, was Arthur Sterling. He was wrapped in a plaid blanket, looking frail, but his face. Robert's breath hitched. Arthur was laughing. Not the polite, restrained chuckle he used at board meetings, but a wide-mouthed, eyes crinkled, genuine roar of laughter. It was a look of pure, unadulterated joy that Robert couldn't remember seeing in decades. And sitting next to him on the swing, making a goofy cross-eyed face at the camera, was Malik. They looked like friends. No, they looked like family. There was an ease between them, a comfortable intimacy that Robert had never achieved with his father, even before the dementia set in. "He liked my joke about the cat," Malik whispered, looking at the photo with a sad smile. Robert felt the world tilting on its axis. The wind seemed to stop. The cold vanished, replaced by a flushing heat of shame that started at his neck and burned up to his ears. This boy, this trespasser in dirty sneakers, had given Arthur the one thing Robert's millions couldn't buy: happiness. "Turn it over," Malik said gently. Robert flipped the photo over. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. On the back, written in black marker, was his father's handwriting. It was shaky, the letters jagged from the Parkinson's tremors that had plagued him at the end, but it was unmistakable. "To Malik, the grandson I never had. Thank you for the Thursdays." The letters blurred. Robert blinked, but the moisture in his eyes wasn't from the wind. He read it again. "The grandson I never had." It was a sentence that carved out Robert's heart. He had no children. He had no time for a family. He had let the Sterling line end with his own selfish ambition, leaving his father to find a surrogate grandson in a boy from the neighborhood. Robert stared at the handwriting, the ink blurring as his vision swims. He is literally unable to look away from the photo, the weight of his own absence crushing him. The silence in the cemetery was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. Robert looked from the photo to the boy, seeing him for the first time not as a nuisance, but as a mirror to his own failure. The wind had died down, leaving a stillness that felt heavy, pressing against Robert's chest. The gray sky was darkening rapidly into the bruised purple of twilight. Beyond the wrought iron gates, the sodium streetlights flickered to life, casting long orange shadows that stretched across the graves like accusatory fingers. Robert lowered the photograph, his hand heavy as lead. He looked at his wrist, a reflex ingrained over decades of corporate conditioning. The crystal face of his Patek Philippe caught the fading light. It was a masterpiece of Swiss engineering, worth more than most people earned in a decade. It tracked seconds, minutes, hours, phases of the moon, and leap years with terrifying precision. It told him exactly what time it was, 5:45 p.m. The foundation gala was starting in 15 minutes. The donors were arriving. The champagne was being poured. But for the first time in his life, the time on the watch meant absolutely nothing. It was just a machine counting down moments he had already wasted. Robert started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the commanding baritone that silenced boardrooms. But it was gone. All that was left was the raspy whisper of a grieving son. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." He looked at Malik, desperation creeping into his tone. He needed to fix this. That was what Robert Sterling did. He fixed problems. He acquired assets. He balanced ledgers. "Did he pay you?" Robert asked, reaching for his wallet inside his coat, his fingers fumbling with the leather. "Is that why you came back? For the time you spent? I can write you a check. For the book. For listening to him. Name your price." It was the wrong thing to say. He saw it immediately in Malik's eyes. The boy didn't look greedy. He looked disappointed. He stepped back, as if Robert had offered him something dirty. "No, sir," Malik said firmly, gently taking the photo from Robert's trembling fingers and tucking it back into the book. "He didn't pay me. He bought me a hot chocolate once at the diner down the street. But mostly, he just listened." "Listened," Robert echoed, the word sounding foreign. "My dad left when I was little," Malik explained, looking down at his worn sneakers. "Mom works 2 shifts. Sometimes Sometimes there's nobody to talk to. But Mr. Arthur was always there. He told me stories about how to be a brave man. He told me that being rich isn't about money, it's about who shows up for you when it rains. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Who shows up for you when it rains? Robert had millions in the bank, thousands of employees, and a global reputation. But here he was, standing in the cold, and the only person who had shown up for his father was a 12-year-old boy with a red scarf and a library book. Robert realized with a sickening clarity that he was the poorest man in the cemetery. His legs, usually so strong, so sure of their path, suddenly gave way. It wasn't a stumble. It was a surrender. Robert dropped to his knees on the wet grass, ruining his suit, the mud seeping instantly into the expensive Italian wool, but he doesn't care. He is level with Malik now. The hierarchy is destroyed. He was no longer the billionaire towering over the trespasser. He was just a man, eye to eye with the child who had been more of a son to Arthur than Robert had ever been. The cold dampness of the grave soil soaked into his knees, grounding him in a reality he had avoided for years. Tears, hot and fast, finally spilled over his cheeks, tracking through the expensive moisturizer and the perfect shave. He didn't wipe them away. "He talked about you, you know," Malik said softly, stepping closer, his voice devoid of judgment now, offering only comfort. "He said you were doing important things. He was proud of you. He just missed you." Robert covered his face with his hands, a sob tearing through his chest, shattering his composure completely. The important things seemed so trivial now. Mergers, acquisitions, galas, they were dust. This moment, this connection he had missed, was the only thing that had ever mattered. He looked up at the boy, his vision blurred, needing to know the full extent of his negligence. "He waited for me every Thursday, didn't he?" Robert choked out, hoping the answer would be no, hoping there was some limit to his father's loneliness. Malik hesitated, then shook his head slowly, delivering the final, devastating truth. "He waited every day, sir." Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the wind biting at his face, but for the first time in years, he felt a warmth sparking in his chest. It wasn't the artificial warmth of a heated car seat or the flush of expensive scotch. It was the raw, painful, yet undeniable heat of being alive and connected to something real. The shame was still there, heavy and sharp, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was becoming fuel. Malik, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, seemingly decided that his duty was done. He carefully tucked the Polaroid back into the pages of Tom Sawyer, treating the book like a holy relic. He zipped up his oversized backpack, the sound loud in the quiet night, and began to wrap his red knit scarf tighter around his neck. "I have to go home," Malik said, his voice small again, returning to the reality of being a 12-year-old boy in a graveyard after dark. "My mom gets off her shift at 6. She worries if I'm not there to watch my little sister." He stood up, slinging the backpack over one shoulder, and turned to leave. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't wait for a reward. He had delivered his message, honored his friend, and now he was walking back to a life Robert could scarcely imagine. "Wait." Robert didn't shout it this time. He said it with a desperation that surprised even himself. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the mud clinging to his suit trousers and the stiffness in his joints. He couldn't let the boy leave. Not yet. If Malik walked away now, the bridge to Arthur would disappear with him. Malik stopped and turned back, wary. Robert stood there, searching for the right words. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't offer a scholarship or a donation. Those things would come later, he vowed silently, and they would be substantial, but right now, offering money felt like an insult. He needed to offer something else. He needed to offer his time. "Can you?" Robert started, his voice humble. "Can you read the end of the chapter? For me? I want to know what happens to Tom." Malik blinked, surprised. "You want me to read? Here? But you're rich. You have to go. You have a party." "The party doesn't matter," Robert said firmly. He looked at the marble angel, then back at the boy. "Please. I haven't heard this story in 40 years. I want to hear it the way he heard it." Malik searched Robert's face for a moment, looking for any sign of mockery. Finding none, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that looked heartbreakingly like the one in the photograph. "Okay," Malik whispered. He sat back down on the cold grass. Robert didn't hover this time. He sat down right beside him, shoulder to shoulder, his expensive cashmere coat resting in the dirt next to Malik's faded hoodie. Malik opened the book. He cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was clear and expressive, rising and falling with the rhythm of Twain's prose. He did the voices, just as he had promised. He gave Tom a mischievous twang and Aunt Polly a stern, sharp tone. Robert closed his eyes. In the darkness, with the wind rustling the dead leaves, the years peeled away. He could almost smell the pipe tobacco. He could almost feel his father's hand on his shoulder. For 10 minutes, Robert Sterling wasn't a billionaire. He was just a son, listening to the same words his father had loved, bridged by the voice of a boy who had saved them both. When the chapter ended, silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of peace. "That was a perfect," Robert whispered. "Thank you." They stood up together. The city lights were glowing bright orange against the horizon. "Come on," Robert said, placing a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "I'm driving you home. And I want to meet your mother. I think we have a lot to talk about. About how to make sure you never have to worry about your rent again." Malik's eyes widened. Really, Robert promised. "Consider it a thank you from Arthur." They walked toward the waiting Cadillac. James was standing by the rear door, his posture rigid, prepared to open it for his boss. But as he saw Robert approaching, mud on his knees, tear tracks on his face, walking side by side with the trespasser, James's expression softened. For 30 years, James had opened the door for Robert Sterling, the businessman. Tonight, he opened the door for Robert Sterling, the man. "Home, sir?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion as he held the door for Malik first. "Not yet, James. We have a stop to make," Robert said, helping Malik buckle his seatbelt. "But first," Robert pulled out his smartphone. It was buzzing with messages from his assistant. "Where are you?" "The donors are waiting. The speech is in 10 minutes. He dialed his assistant's number. She answered on the first ring, frantic. "Mr. Sterling. Thank goodness. You're 5 minutes away, right? The mayor is asking for you." Robert looked out the window at the dark outline of the cemetery, then at Malik, who was looking around the luxurious car with wide, amazed eyes. "No, Susan," Robert said calmly. "I'm not coming." "What?" "But, sir, the gala, the reputation." "Cancel the gala, Susan. Take me home, James. I have stories to tell my kids." In the silence of that cold November evening, a billionaire learned that his greatest inheritance wasn't his father's money, but the friendship of a boy who had nothing to give but time. We often judge books by their covers and people by their clothes, yet true wealth is hidden in the quiet moments of connection we share with others. Let Robert's journey remind us that it is never too late to stop looking at our watches and start looking into the hearts of those around us. If this story touched you, take a moment today to reach out to someone you love, because time is the one treasure we can never earn back.